start to look like the Dead Sea Scrolls. I am Mark Goldston. You know, this has been an interesting morning. I've been a CEO, I hate to admit this, through 4 decades. So I was CEO originally in the 80s, then the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s. And I've seen such amazing change in companies that what I thought I was going to do today was I was going to promise you one thing: I will give you take-home value. If you don't get take-home value for this presentation, you don't have to pay me for this talk. Of course, I'm not getting paid for this talk anyway, but if I was, I would give you the money back. And you know, some of you will remember some of the things I'll be talking about, but if you look at the office concept and how we work, going back to the 30s and 40s and then the 50s, and they talked about how women were typing up bank statements. It's funny how we all had some of these same images. The thing that really strikes me is when we got to the 70s, which is when I entered the workforce when I got out of the Kellogg Business School, it was all about segmentation. Offices had invented cubicles, and people were being put in places they were never being put before. These were hallways, and now companies are structuring themselves differently around the way they work. And the 80s brought automation. Back when I was running Fabergé in the mid-80s, there were no computers anywhere in the office. We had a mainframe located somewhere in Mahwah, New Jersey, wherever the hell that is. And nobody had computers, and so we were writing. We had word processing, but we didn't have the computers in our offices. It's amazing, we ran Fortune 500 companies and actually did well. But what happened over time, and this is something that I think is really important, is that freedom started to come into the workplace. And that's a lot of what happened in the 2000s when I was the original CEO of Net Zero. We took Net Zero public in 1999. In fact, Tim Draper was one of my original investors. And at that time, freedom was what was coming into the office. Software engineers who were working through the night weren't necessarily working 9 to 5. And so it didn't matter where they were and what they did. And this really changed a lot about how we work. And it's changing the future of work, because today, if you look at where we are, we're in a facilitated environment. But I like to say, you know, the gig is up. We're in the gig economy. And the gig economy is definitely going to change the way we work. And it was a big adjustment for me. I have 32-year-old twin sons who are the co-founders of APL, the sneaker company. And they, most of our team, obviously we're in it as well, most of our team, they're very young people, and they work in a very different manner. And it was a huge adjustment watching them and the companies that I advise, which are millennial-based, and how they work and embracing it. In the beginning, you try to move them into the traditional way in which we work. And then what you realize is the world is changing. You either change or you will become a dinosaur. And that's not an overstatement. And so what I look at and say, if we're in a gig economy, what's the key overriding theme that you as a CEO or a business owner need to know about? And to me, it's we grew up in an environment with inflexible overhead burden. First thing you'd say to people, you say, oh, you run a company, what's your company called? XYZ. How many people do you employ? Who cares? Who cares how many people you employ? Why is that the badge of honor? Do you make money? Is your company growing? People don't talk about that there. It's all about, and it's a military-based way of thinking, which is how many people are in your platoon. What we're trying to do in today's world is say, how can we take the inefficiency out of the business world? So I think you control efficiency by outsourcing commodity functions and keeping your in-house proprietary functions with your manpower. What do I mean by that? In a gig economy, you can outsource functions that are customer service, certain software development, processing. All of these things are done by organizations with scale who find the lowest cost alternative to go to large companies or small companies and say, you do not need this in your infrastructure. So what are you doing when you do that? You're basically taking these functions and you're turning them into a variable cost. And I'm going to talk more about this because this is something you can use in your business to increase your profitability virtually overnight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the future is going to look like. And the future is going to be all about speed, flexibility, and most importantly, and Tim even talked about this, decentralization. All the companies that I see today that are successful are dealing on this matrix. Speed, Decentralization and flexibility. What do I mean by that? Well, we're going to be in an environment very shortly where people are going to value process innovation as much or more as they value product innovation. Think about that. Process innovation is going to become the new product innovation. And companies don't focus on process innovation. Rarely do you see them because they're afraid to change. You're in the airplane, you're in the cockpit, you don't want to change. You're afraid of crashing the plane. The reality is, what happens if you don't change? You will definitely crash the plane. And you can't really see it. So the dilemma that you have as an owner or CEO is, how are you going to address reducing risk and dealing with lower growth, which is what your shareholders and your owners might want, versus the fact that that strategy is going to get you into a ditch. And if you want higher growth with higher risk and speed, you're going to sacrifice some profitability in the near term in order to get you to the other side of the hill. It is very unusual to find a company that will make that transition in flight. And that's why you said so many new companies are coming on the frontier, and they're really moving to the head of the pack because they're looking at the vulnerabilities of the competitive space. And they're saying that is a battleship in a pond. They can't turn. So these people are basically filling the void. And I look at this as a major opportunity because I believe that while inefficiency is a problem in a business, the biggest problem you have is being left behind. And companies don't realize it. Go look at all the great business books that were written in the 90s. Look at all those companies that are mentioned. Where are they today? I mean, I don't want to mention any names because some of my friends are running those companies, but they are household names that have fallen from grace. So the way I look at it is, the world is going to change and become a collaborations world. I have purchased probably more than 40 companies during the course of my career. They are expensive, they take a lot of time, you may be one of multiple bidders, and you may lose. And you could have wasted 12 months' time. Collaborations don't involve that. Collaborations are strategic alliances or JVs are the wave of the future. Not that outright acquisitions won't happen, but if you have a small to medium-sized company and you want to get international, you want to get into a new category, do a strategic alliance. You can access those people's ability and their on-the-ground talent overnight, share in the benefit, learn it, and decide if it's something you either want to acquire, like a try before you buy, or whether or not this is a long-term strategy. The next dip of your toe in the water is a JV. A JV really takes the risk and mitigates it, because it's taking two companies who need to do something. They're banding together. Yes, they're sharing the profit, but they've shared the risk. And this is something small to medium-sized companies have got to focus on over the next 5 years. The other thing is, and this is not a cliche, I use this in my life, you use it in your business. You've got to control your controllables. You have to take your P&L and say, what are my controllable expenses? And you have to control them. Because there's a lot that's going to happen that you can't control. But your intransigent burden is what's holding your company back. And I'm going to show you a couple of things that you can do to evaluate that. Because what I believe is when you control controllables, the first thing you then say is, what can I give up? Or what can I outsource? So when you shift to variable expenses, you put operating leverage in your P&L. Think about it. You've got a nut that you've got to cover. It's your burden rate. The higher the burden rate, the bigger the challenge. If you lower that burden rate hurdle and you outsource a lot of the gig economy talent functions, what have you done? You've put operating leverage in your business. Well, why do I say that's a good thing to do? This is a shocking statistic. Do you realize that every employee in your firm carries with him or her a 30% overhead burden? When you add up benefits, travel, entertainment, put it on. It's 30%. Check with your CFOs. So you say Joe makes $120,000 a year. No, he doesn't. He makes $120,000 a year plus $36,000 in benefits. He makes $156,000 a year. That's what you have as an alternative to use in an outsourced environment. What's the advantage? When the task is done, you may not have to employ that outsourced service anymore. So what have you done to your P&L? You've reduced your fixed overhead, and you've added flexibility, and you've added operating leverage. So this is another shocking statistic. I couldn't believe it, actually, when I researched it. Not only are 50% of the people today in the workforce millennials, and it's going to be 75% by 2027, but the average tenure of a millennial in the workforce is 2.8 years in a job. 2.8 years. Think about that. Do you know how massively inefficient training budgets have become? You bring somebody into a program and you train them, and you've got to get your ROI back in 2.8 years? I mean, you believe in the tooth fairy if you think that's going to happen. So you're going to have to change the way you look at who you hire, and more importantly, you're going to have to train them so they start yielding results immediately, because you may only have them for 2.8 years. This is critical. So what's going to happen is you're going to have people who are going to, I'm going to move back one because I want to talk about this. You're going to have people who are going to say, I'm going to change the way we train. And if I can't change the way we train and I can't increase the efficiency of my training, I'm going to outsource it. I'm going to let the outsourced organizations do the training. And what are we going to do? We're going to buy the service. And what's going to happen when we buy it? It's going to yield day one, minute one, hour one when we engage it. There is no learning curve. If they can't give you an instant yield, you don't hire the firm. You can't say that with an employee. You have no idea. By the time you find out if you're right or wrong, the gig is up. So I look at this in a very different way. I say if I'm in a company today and I'm allocating resources for the future, I'm looking at data science. Think about all the things you've heard about this morning. Now you say, well, how am I going to do data science? I'm in a YPO company. I don't have the resources to do that. I don't have access to that kind of talent. Guess what? You don't have to. We live in a world where machine learning and AI and apps are going to allow you, as a YPO company, to have sophisticated data science without having what? Data scientists. You're not going to train data scientists. The world is training them for you. Take advantage of it. So, to me, when I look at this, I say, in the future, if I'm going to plan what my company is going to do in the next 10 years, I better be thinking about this. I'm going to think about how I've got to manage AI, robotics, and machine learning separate from human capital. Because in this case, you're managing KPIs. You're managing machines. In this case, you're managing people. It's a very different managerial skill set. You don't think the C-suite's going to change dramatically in the next 10 years? You're going to have people who are responsible for managing the capital-intensive, KPI-based machines, and people who are responsible for managing the people. And those are very different skill sets, and business schools and corporations are going to have to change the way they orient people so that they can perform in a world like that. So skills will change, and that's why jobs will go away, but new jobs will appear. We're not going to get replaced by machines. We're going to have to manage the machines. And if you can't manage the machines, they can't be productive. It won't work for you. So I promise you some take-home value. You've got to do this. How many people in this room are CEOs? How many people own their company? How many people are equity holders in their company? Okay, you have to do this. When you get back home, please do this exercise. I would normally come in and spend a lot of time and hopefully get a lot of money for giving you this, but we're YPO, so we're family, so I'm going to put this out there for you. I want you guys to go home and do a theoretical acquisition of your own company. Pretend that you're either a competitor or private equity firm, and what would you do if you bought your company? You might not like what this analysis shows you, but you got to do it. Everybody, raise your hand. Who's going to go home and actually really try to do this? Raise your hand. How come you're not raising your hand? You got to do it. You got to do it. I'm going to call you and find out if you went and did it. Everybody who didn't have their hand up, I'm going to call you and find out why you didn't do this. Because there's no harm, there's no foul. You go through this exercise, you completely clean the slate. There's no sacred cows. I don't care if your Aunt Shirley's in charge of customer service. Doesn't matter. Clean slate. And what you do is you say, I'm going to get out of the way so you can see this. You say, look, I'm either going to drive growth, sub-optimize my profitability, and maximize my speed, which is kind of the economy we're in today, or, because I've been around a long time with my business, I'm going to improve my efficiency, I'm going to enhance my scalability, I'm going to maximize profitability. That's great. In 5 years, you're toast. So enjoy that, because the smorgasbord will not refill when the counter is empty. So this is your biggest decision that you'll be facing in your company. The other thing is this, and you can do this personally as well. You got to identify your vulnerability. Where are you vulnerable? I mean, a lot of people just ignore it. It's like they go to the doctor, they don't want to talk about anything bad. Well, if you wait until it's bad, you can't fix it. What's your vulnerability? What would your competitor say is your vulnerability? So you want to identify it, and then you want to say, how would my competitor attack my business? We do this all the time. I know where I'm vulnerable, and if I were the other side, this is how I would attack my company. You guys do? How many people in the room actually do that? Raise your hand. Most people don't. Nobody wants to know that answer. Except, you know who wants to know that answer? The people you compete with. You've got to do this. And once you do that, basically what you're saying to yourself is, look, Mark, my business isn't broken. So why do I need to do it? Because it's going to break. They all do. I've run enormously successful companies. Almost every one of them, including many of them when I was there, they broke. Businesses break. There's a famous French expression, stuff happens. I can be a little more colorful with it, but that's what, it's not whether bad things happen, it's what do you do when it happens to you? How do you respond to it? Nobody's walking through life in a bubble. No business does. So what are you going to do when your business breaks? So I would suggest that you break it, theoretically, and then you fix it. And so here is basically how I would do it. And this is what I wanted to share with you because you're YPO folks, and I feel like I need to do this for you. So the first thing is strategic. And you got to ask yourself these questions. If you want to take a photograph, please feel free to do it. But does the current strategy fit the market you're in today, especially for companies that have been around a long time? What's your competitive advantage in your company? Do you have a unique selling proposition? What's the price elasticity? Have you tested the price elasticity in your business? Or are you deathly afraid to change your pricing? What's the next generation of your core product or service? Do you even have one? Have you thought about that? Have you created a strategy for international and direct-to-consumer? Because that's where the world's going. So if you don't have a strategy for that, you've got a problem. And then if you identified strategic alliances or JV partners who do have this knowledge and can get you into that market immediately. So that's the strategic side. Then you got the managerial side. This is the side nobody wants to deal with. Right? This is the tough one.
Mark, ready to clear these out for you so people can see the screen.
Yeah. Would you hire all the people on your team again? Ask yourself that question. That's the tough one. And I'll guarantee you at least half of those people you would not hire again. I'm not saying it, I'm just saying it. Okay? 2, is your org structure aligned with the current and future needs of the business, or is it just how it's been? It's working fine, I'm good. What are the gaps in the skill set in the current organization? Have you ever even tried to assess where your skill gaps are in your company? What functions could you outsource and just supervise with a small team? We do this all the time. It's a huge part of why when we were at Net Zero, we had 500 employees. Earthlink had 5,000. AOL was a small country. We were doing $2.5 million of revenue per employee and generated almost $1 billion of cumulative EBITDA. That's how we did it. So I would say, have you evolved your KPIs to align with the business that you're going to be in, not the business that you're in today? And then what's the retention plan to preserve the archival knowledge and the training ROI in your company when, if you have millennial employees, they're going to leave you within 3 years? So what happens to your archival knowledge in your company? Think about that. You talk about the risk of outsourcing. The bigger risk is that you insource and that intellectual capital walks out the door. And then financial, and this may be for you or your CFOs, are you generating organic revenue growth? Because if you're not, your business isn't healthy. This is like if you're in a retail business, what are your comp store sales gains? If all you're doing is getting growth by opening new stores, that's great, but you're avoiding the obvious. Have you determined ROI goals for every project you do? We do this at every company I've ever had. Anytime you're spending money, there's an ROI goal, and you evaluate it, and somebody's accountable for delivering that. What level of flow-through operating leverage exists on your burden recovery? What do I mean by that? Say you're running a business and you've got a 60% gross profit. Once you've covered your overhead, every incremental sale that you make on your P&L, 60% of those dollars drop straight to the EBITDA. That's called operating leverage. That's what burden recovery in the company means. You lower your burden, you increase your operating leverage, you have more money to spend, and you have a bigger smile on your face. Do you have access to debt in lieu of equity for growth capital? The most expensive capital in the world is what? Equity. You're giving up ownership. Now people say, well, I hate debt. I got in trouble in business school because I wrote a paper that said debt and leverage are not the same. I almost got booted out of my finance class. They go, what are you talking about? Debt and leverage are the same thing. No, they're not. Leverage is when you have your own money and you want someone else to give you cheap money. Debt is, I have no money, and without your money, I'm dead. That's debt. So a lot of companies have debt. The question is, could you get leverage? And that's something you have to ask a banker or an investor. Does your business CapEx align with the future needs? A lot of companies are doing CapEx, and the useful life of the capital expenditure is longer than the viability of the function that the machine's going to perform. Because we're in a rapidly changing world. So you're wasting your money by CapExing current function without re-architecting. Have you done a value engineering analysis? How many people, raise your hand, know what value engineering is? Value engineering means that you take a product or service and you cost efficiently build it so that the consumer never sees a change. Imagine a shampoo bottle. You'd never see a change in the bottle. You'd never see a change in the viscosity of the shampoo. But we found a way through materials, through fill rates, to value engineer the production to get the cost of goods down. Every business should have a value engineering program. If you don't, you are missing a huge opportunity. And then lastly, have you computed what your customer acquisition cost is and what the lifetime value of the customer is? Because if you haven't done this, why are you spending money to go get new customers when you have no idea how long they're going to stay and how much you're going to make on them? That makes no sense. So the way I look at this, and listen, I have a little bit different perspective, is I don't think the fourth industrial revolution is going to be industrial at all. I think it's all going to be humanistically based. I think the ability of all of us to morph, and the people who work for us to morph in the new world, that's the revolution, not the technology itself. So, from my perspective, I try to constantly evolve and change the way I view things. I have a long history of being a CEO for decades, and that's all great. It's a great knowledge base to have. But if I don't morph along with the world that we live in, that'll be great for giving lectures and writing books, but it's not going to help move anybody's business forward in the world we live in today. So, as they say when we go on our great YPO trips, only in YPO, I wanted to do this because what I find is if I'm going to take my time and go to a conference, then number one, when I wrote my book, The Turnaround Prescription, the number one thing I said is you've got to provide take-home value. This isn't entertainment. We're not good entertainers. There are people who are better looking, funnier, sing better. We're only here for one reason. We're peers, and we're trying to share with each other what we've learned so we can make each other better. That's the reason I'm here today. I thank you for your time.